Next section is on TIPS. So TIPS stands for Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. The idea behind these securities is that they will adjust the payment to make up for inflation. And that's a problem you have when you're buying a bond. You're always worried about inflation, particularly if you're buying long-term bonds, say a 20-year bond, because the payment that you get from it now may be very good, but if inflation, particularly if inflation turns out to be more than you think, more than you expected, then the value you get from that bond is a lot less because prices are so much higher, but the payment from the bond doesn't change. So these bonds, these TIPS bonds, say, well, we'll protect you from inflation because we will adjust the amount of payment coming from that bond for the inflation rate, based on the inflation rate. And so that's a very nice thing. And these are very good investments in terms of they will, obviously, if there's more inflation than expected, these are a good place to be. The problem with these bonds is that they're very expensive. Because this is such a nice feature, it's removing all the risk you have for investing in the bond. It comes from the Treasury, so you can be certain that you're going to get the payments. And then they're going to adjust those payments for inflation. So these are very, very expensive bonds to buy. So while they're wonderful bonds and you can lock in a guaranteed inflation-adjusted return right now, you have to pay a lot for it. So your purchasing power will not increase very much from owning these bonds. Okay, so we've got an example on how this works. So if you have a 2-year 30% coupon TIPS bond, the real cash flow, this means after adjusting for inflation, this is what your cash flows will turn out to be. And I can look at these as, well, if this wasn't a TIPS, if this was just a regular bond, this is the payments that the bond would make to me. It's a 3% coupon, so it'll pay me $30 next year, and then $30 in year 2. And since it's a 2-year bond, it's going to mature 2 years from now. It's also going to pay me the par value at the end of year 2. So these are the kind of the base payments of the bond, but it's going to adjust these payments for inflation. Right? And the way that works is this. Suppose, for example, that there's 5% inflation in year 1. Well, then it will adjust that payment to reflect the amount of inflation. So I'll take 30 times 1 plus 5%. Since there's 5% inflation, I need to pay you 5% more, so that's $31.50. All right? Now that's easy enough. Kind of the trick is in the second one. If inflation is 4%, and the trick here is to realize that you've got to adjust this one for both years' inflation, because it's adjusting the payment for all the inflation since the time you bought it, all right? So, or since the time the bond started. So, in this case, we're going to take the payment we would receive without any inflation, 1,030, and then we're going to multiply times 1 plus 4% to take care of inflation this year, and then times 1 plus 5% to take care of inflation last year, and there's the payment we would receive as a second payment. Right? Notice this has $1,000 in it because it's a 2-year bond. It matures this year. Okay. So here's a question here. You can solve this on your own. You're buying a 2-year 4.5% coupon TIPS. So now again, notice it's 2 years. It's going to pay you $45 if there's no inflation, and then $1,045 in 2 years if there's no inflation. However, inflation in the first year is 6.25%. So what will the first coupon payment be? And I encourage you to take a moment and figure that out. And I'll give you the answer here. Well, it's going to be $45, and we're just going to increase that by 1.0625. So 47.82. 47.81, yes, 47.81. All right. And then the next question says, well, what's the second payment going to be? Well, this is a 2-year bond, so it's going to mature $1,045 without inflation, without adjusting for inflation, but there were 2 years of inflation. So I'll multiply times 1.03. That gives me the inflation in the second year, and then times 1.0625. That's inflation in the first year, so the answer here is A. Right? That's the amount of money that bond will pay me. Okay. Next topic is current yield. And current yield, Now we have several yields going on in this topic, but remember the previous yield we talked about was yield to maturity. Let's see if I can get back here. So we're talking about yield to maturity, and that's just the rate of return that investors expect. I think about yield to maturity as the number that goes in for I. Right? Now this is a little bit different. This is current yield, and current yield is just defined as this expression here, and you just need to remember the difference. This is current yield, and this is what it means. It's the coupon payment you expect to get divided by the price of the bond, right? And as I say, this is the return you get on your bond investment from only the coupon payments. So if I buy a 6% coupon bond for $750, then at the end of the year it pays me $60. That's just 6% times 1,000. On a $750 investment, that represents an 8% return. So my money grew by 8% just based on getting that coupon payment, right? So, yeah, I ask these questions quite a bit, and students sometimes confuse the two, yield to maturity and current yield. So just keep in mind here, if it says current yield, it has to do with this formula. That's not the same as the yield to maturity on the bond. Okay, so I've got an example here of two bonds. One's 8%, one's 12%. The yield to maturity is 10%. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at the prices of these bonds through time. Okay, what happens if I buy this bond today and then I sell it at the end of the year? So I'm asking for the 1-year rate of return on an investment in this bond. And so, well, the first thing I have to do is figure out, well, what did I pay for the bond, right? So when I bought it, it was a 10-year, 8% coupon with rates of 10%. So I'm looking at the price of this is the 8% coupon at a yield to maturity of 10%. It sells for $877.11. And notice the 10-year bond has a higher coupon rate. The coupon rate is above the yield to maturity, so it's going to sell for a price above 1,000. That's $1,122.89. Right? And the question says, well, if yield to maturity next year are still 10%, what's the 1-year rate of return on the bond? Well, I can find the price I would sell them for next year. Notice the only thing that changes is N changed from 10 to 9. Everything else stayed the same. Still 10% yield, 80 and 120 are the payments and things. So I can find this price. This was the price I would sell it for. And then remember, my rate of return is the money I have at the end. So in 1 year, I'm going to collect the coupon and sell the bond for the price. Notice I make 10%. And for bond B, notice I also make 10%. Right? Coupon plus the sale price divided by the original price minus 1 is 10%. All right, and this is just kind of showing you that's what we would expect. If nothing changed about these bonds, when you buy the bond at the beginning, you expect to get a yield to maturity of 10% if nothing changes. Okay, if the level of interest rates doesn't change, then you would expect to get a yield to maturity of 10%, and that's exactly what happens. Since nothing changed, you make the yield that you expected. All right, notice that would not be true had the yield changed over the year, because this price would be different. Right? Okay, so here's a question for you to practice. I'll work out the answer for you here. So we're buying this is last year now. So 1 year ago when I bought the bond, it was a 13-year, 8.9% coupon bond. And the yield to maturity was 7%. So they've given me everything I need to know to figure out the price I paid for it last year. So let's just do that. N is 13, I is 8.9. The payment, I'm sorry, I've got that wrong. N is 13. I is 7. All right, the payment is 89. And the future value is 1,000. And I can figure out that price. And it's that, $1,158.79. I'm going to change the sign on that, and I'm going to store it in memory 1. Okay? Now, 1 year later, I sell the bond, and the yield to maturity is 6%. So notice rates went down. I would expect, when I bought the bond with a yield to maturity of 8.9%, I'm expecting to earn 8.9% if nothing changes. I'm sorry, I'm I'm doing exactly what I told you guys not to do. I'm confusing the coupon rate and the yield to maturity. So let me back up here. Not the 8.9%, that's the coupon rate. When I buy the bond, the yield to maturity is 7, and I'm expecting to earn 7% on this investment if nothing changes. But in this case, the rates changed to 6%, and they went down from 7 to 6. So I would expect to earn more than that, a rate higher than 7%. Right? So to figure out the exact rate of return, I need to know the price that I'd sell it for 1 year later. Now, a year later, it's going to be a 12-year bond, so I'm going to put in 12 as N. The new yield is 6. Right, the payment stays the same, that's 89. And I'll get $1,000 as the future value. I'm going to compute that price. So there's that. I can sell it for that much a year later. Now notice also a year later I will collect the coupon payment. So I'm going to add to that number $89. That'll be my coupon payment. And then, so I've got, this is the total amount of money that I end up with at the end. I'm going to divide by the cost to make that investment in the first place, and then subtract 1, and that will be my answer, 14.96%. Okay, 14.96% return. Okay, and then there's discussion here of zero coupon bonds, and zero coupon bonds are really easy to deal with. They're exactly what they say. They pay you a zero coupon every year. So the only thing you get from these bonds is you get the par value at the end. You do not receive any money along the way. It makes them very easy to work with. So if we're going to fill in this table here of zero coupon bonds, first thing it wants to know is, well, what's the yield to maturity on a 30-year zero that's selling for $300 right now? And you can, because these are zeros, it makes it pretty easy. I know the payment is 0. It's going to pay me $1,000 at the end. N is 30. The price is $300. The price is very small because there's no coupon payments here. There's only one payment way out at the end. And I'm going to calculate that yield to maturity, and I get 4.095%. Right? And I can do the same thing here. Now in this case I'm solving for N, the time to maturity. So I can put in 300, got to make it negative. That's the price. There's no payment. The future value is 1,000. The yield is 10. I think I've got everything in there. I'm sorry, the yield is 8. I was looking at the wrong one, so let me just put that in there. The yield is 8. Everything else is the same. Solve for N. Push the wrong button. Let's see if that'll work. Yes. 15.64. All right, that's my maturity. And I can find the price of this. So again, 10 is I. Maturity is 10, so N is 10. The payment is 0. $1,000 future value. The price for that would be $385.54. Right? So zero coupon bonds. There's really nothing. These are easy to work with mathematically. For the when you're solving these on the calculator, though, the thing to remember is just the payment is 0. Everything else is the same. Alright, so hopefully I get the same answers here, 4.09%. I'm solving these using the formulas. That's one nice thing that we like about zeros is there's not a lot of cash flows in between, so these equations are easy to work with. When you're putting a lot of these investments together, sometimes that's really nice to have zeros because mathematically they're easy to work with. You don't have all those other payments to make things more difficult. So you can solve it this way. Solving it by the calculator is fine also. So that's 4.09%. Yeah, and here's how I'd solve that in the calculator. I'd solve in the calculator for N. By the way, you can solve this mathematically for N also, for those of you who are curious about that. You have to use logarithms though because N is in the exponent. It's probably easier just to do it by calculator. Again, you have to remember the present value is negative. You get the same answer I got there, 15.64. And then finding the price of this, notice I'm just using the present value formula here because I don't have any payments. That makes it easy. Again, we could just put it in the calculator too. We'll get the same answer. Okay, so that's zero coupon bonds, and I'll pick up after this on the next recording.